The Mercedes-AMG screeched to a halt in front of a crumbling auto shop, dust swirling around Italian heels that cost more than the building's monthly rent. Vivian Cole stepped out, her black suit untouched by the chaos of a broken engine, her eyes scanning the faded sign, Dawson's Auto, like it was an insult to her existence. Inside, a man in oil-stained coveralls knelt beside an 8-year-old girl, guiding her pencil through a math problem, not even glancing up at the fortune standing in his doorway. "It'll be fixed in 15 minutes, he said, voice calm as still water. She laughed, the kind of laugh that had crushed boardrooms and buried competitors. 15 minutes? In this place? But something in his stillness made her pause. She didn't know his name. She didn't know this town. And she certainly didn't know that 15 minutes from now, she would be standing in the same spot, unable to move, unable to speak, staring at a man who had just shattered everything she believed about herself. The August heat pressed down on Ridgemont like a punishment, turning the asphalt soft and the air thick with the smell of baked earth and motor oil. Vivian had been driving for 3 hours on a route her GPS insisted was a shortcut, watching the landscape shift from gleaming office parks to forgotten farmland. To this, a stretch of road where hope seemed to have packed up and left years ago. The dashboard had flickered first. Then the stereo cut out. By the time the engine coughed its final breath, she was coasting on momentum alone, her knuckles white against the leather steering wheel. She pulled into the only sign of life for miles, a small auto repair shop with a hand-painted sign that looked older than she was. Dawson's Auto. The building itself seemed to sag under the weight of its own history, paint peeling like sunburned skin. A single garage door opened to reveal the shadowy interior. 2 gas pumps out front hadn't been used in what looked like decades, their numbers frozen in another era's prices. A pickup truck missing its tailgate sat in the side lot, and somewhere inside, country music played at a volume meant only for the person listening. Vivian stepped out of her Mercedes, her Louboutin heels sinking slightly into the gravel. The heat hit her like opening an oven door. Immediate, aggressive, unforgiving. She pressed her phone to her ear, already calculating. Mercedes roadside assistance, 2 hours minimum. Her meeting in the city, 4 hours away. The margin for error, non-existent. She walked toward the open garage, her shadow stretching long in the afternoon sun, her patience already worn thin by circumstances beyond her control. Inside, the temperature dropped by maybe 5 degrees, enough to notice, not enough to matter. The shop smelled of grease, metal, and something sweet, like old coffee left too long on a burner. Tools hung on pegboards with military precision, each wrench and socket in its designated spot. A vintage Coca-Cola machine hummed in the corner, and above the workbench, a calendar from the local feed store was still turned to the previous month. But what caught Vivian's attention wasn't the shop itself. It was the scene at the small desk near the back. A man in his late 30s knelt beside a young girl, his coveralls stained with the honest evidence of work. The girl, maybe 8 years old, sat in a rolling chair too big for her, a math workbook open on the desk, her pencil hovering over a fraction problem. The man's hand guided hers gently, his voice low and patient, as he explained something about numerators and denominators. Neither of them looked up when Vivian's heels clicked against the concrete floor. Neither of them seemed to notice that someone worth more than their entire block had just walked into their world. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her voice carrying the edge of someone who wasn't used to being ignored. The man held up one finger without turning around, a gesture so casual, so dismissive, that Vivian felt her jaw tighten. She watched as he finished the explanation, watched as the girl's face lit up with understanding, watched as he ruffled her hair and said, "See? You had it all along, Penny. Just needed to slow down." Only then did he stand, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen cleaner days. He was taller than she expected, with the kind of build that came from actual labor rather than gym memberships. His face was weathered, but not old. His eyes the color of creek water after rain, brown with hints of green that caught the light. He looked at her car through the open garage door, then back at her, his expression unchanged. Mercedes AMG, electrical system probably. These new ones have more computers than NASA. He checked his watch, a battered Timex that looked like it had survived a war. It'll be fixed in 15 minutes. Vivian laughed. She couldn't help it. The sound came out sharp and brittle, like ice cracking under pressure. 15 minutes? She gestured at the shop around them, at the vintage tools and the ancient Coke machine, and the little girl doing homework in the corner. For a Mercedes electrical system? In this place? The man didn't flinch, didn't bristle, didn't do any of the things Vivian expected from someone who'd just been insulted. He simply looked at her with those creek water eyes and said, 15 minutes. His voice was calm as still water, as if he were stating the color of the sky or the day of the week. Not a promise, not a boast, just a fact. Something about his certainty irritated her more than his casualness. In Vivian's world, confidence without credentials was arrogance, and arrogance without results was failure waiting to happen. She'd built coal development from nothing by knowing exactly what she was capable of, and never overpromising. This man, in his oil-stained coveralls, in his crumbling shop, had just looked at a $100,000 piece of German engineering and declared he could fix it in 15 minutes. "Tell you what," she said, crossing her arms. "If you can actually fix my car in 15 minutes, I'll pay you 10 times your usual rate. But if you can't," she paused, letting the silence do its work, "you fix it for free. And you admit you should never make promises you can't keep." The man studied her for a moment, his head tilting slightly to one side. In the corner, the little girl, Penny, had stopped doing her homework and was watching the exchange with wide, curious eyes. The country music had shifted to something slower, sadder. A woman's voice singing about roads not taken. "Deal," the man said simply. He walked to his workbench, selected 3 tools with the precision of a surgeon, and headed toward her car. As he passed, he called over his shoulder, "Name's Ray, by the way, Ray Dawson. And that's my daughter, Penny. She won't bite." He paused at the garage door. "But she might ask you a lot of questions. Fair warning." Vivian watched him go, her phone still clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She should call her assistant, should reschedule the meeting, should do any of the 1,000 things that the CEO of a $200 million development company should do when stranded in the middle of nowhere. Instead, she found herself looking at the little girl, who was looking right back at her with the unfiltered curiosity that only children possess. "Your car is really pretty," Penny said. "Are you a princess?" The question caught Vivian so off guard that she actually laughed. A different laugh this time, softer, less like a weapon. "No," she said. "I'm not a princess." "Then what are you?" Vivian opened her mouth to answer, but found that the words didn't come as easily as she expected. CEO, developer, businesswoman. All accurate. None of them felt like the right answer to give an 8-year-old with curious eyes. "I build things," she finally said. "Big buildings, shopping centers, that kind of thing." Penny's eyes went wide. "That's so cool. Like with your own hands?" "No, Vivian hesitated. "I have people who do that part. I just make it happen." "Oh," Penny seemed to consider this. "My daddy builds things with his own hands. He says that's the best way to know if something's done right." She pointed to her math workbook. "Do you know about fractions? I'm stuck on this one." Vivian glanced toward the garage door, where Ray had already popped the hood of her Mercedes and was leaning into the engine bay with the ease of someone entering their own living room. She should check on him, should make sure he wasn't making things worse, should do something other than stand here being interrogated by a child. But Penny was still looking at her expectantly, pencil in hand, and somewhere in the back of Vivian's mind, a memory stirred. Sitting at a foster family's kitchen table, struggling with homework, wishing someone would help her understand. "Let me see," she heard herself say, walking toward the desk. "Which one are you stuck on?" Penny beamed and scooted over to make room. As Vivian sat down beside her, her phone buzzed. Her assistant probably, wondering why she'd gone silent. She ignored it. Outside, she could hear Ray moving around her car, tools clicking and clinking in a rhythm that sounded almost like music. Ray worked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. His hands moved through the engine bay like they had their own memory, finding connections and components without needing to look. The Mercedes' electrical system was a maze of wires and sensors that would have intimidated most mechanics. But Ray traced the problem in under 2 minutes. A loose ground wire behind the fuse box, probably jarred loose by the rough roads leading into town. He could hear Vivian talking to Penny inside, her voice different now than it had been when she first arrived. Softer, less certain. She was explaining something about fractions, and Penny was asking follow-up questions with the relentless curiosity that made Ray's heart swell with pride every single day. His daughter had a gift for getting people to open up, for finding the cracks in their armor and pouring light through them. The loose wire was an easy fix, 10 minutes tops, including testing. But Ray found himself slowing down, taking his time with each step. It wasn't about winning or losing the bet. Money had never been what drove him, despite what people like this woman seemed to believe. It was something else. Something about the way she'd laughed when he told her 15 minutes. Something about the emptiness hiding behind her expensive suit and her expensive car and her expensive way of looking at the world. He remembered his father's words, spoken in this same garage 30 years ago. "Every car that comes through that door is attached to a person, son, and every person is carrying something heavy. Your job isn't just to fix the car, it's to give them a moment of peace while they're here." Ray tightened the ground connection and closed the fuse box cover. 12 minutes. He had time. Inside, Vivian was surprised to find that explaining fractions to Penny was actually enjoyable. The girl's questions were thoughtful, her confusion genuine, and when she finally understood the concept of common denominators, her face lit up like a Christmas tree. "I get it now," Penny exclaimed. "You have to make them speak the same language first." "Exactly," Vivian said, and realized she was smiling, really smiling, not the practiced smile she wore in board meetings and investor presentations. "That's exactly right. Daddy says that about people too," Penny continued, flipping to the next problem. "He says sometimes people don't understand each other because they're speaking different languages. Like, not Spanish or French or whatever, but like, their hearts speak different." Vivian's smile faltered. She thought about her own life, the language of profit margins and quarterly reports, of acquisitions and leverage and market share. When was the last time she'd spoken from her heart? When was the last time anyone had spoken to hers? Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked at it. A message from her assistant. "Dawson property update. Owner still refusing. Council vote tomorrow. Suggest we proceed with pressure strategy." The name hit her like cold water. Dawson. She looked up at the sign visible through the window. Dawson's Auto. Her eyes swept across the shop. The old tools, the vintage calendar, the faded photographs on the wall showing the same building through decades of change. In one photo, a younger man stood with his arm around a boy who couldn't have been more than 10. The boy had creekwater eyes. The man had the same gentle smile that Ray had worn while teaching Penny her fractions. Vivian's stomach dropped. This was it. This was the property. the last piece of land standing between her and Cole Plaza, the development that would be the crown jewel of her empire. She'd sent people to negotiate. They'd been refused. She'd sent lawyers to find code violations. They'd found nothing actionable. She'd planned to use her connections on the city council to push through an eminent domain proceeding, to take this land whether its owner wanted to sell or not. And now she was sitting in that same shop, being offered coffee by that owner's daughter, while he fixed her car in the garage outside. "You okay?" Penny asked, tilting her head. "You look kinda sick." Vivian forced her expression back to neutral. "I'm fine, just work stuff. Daddy says work stuff can wait. He says the only stuff that can't wait is family stuff." Penny returned to her math problem, then paused. "Do you have a family?" The question shouldn't have hurt. It was innocent, asked without agenda, but it found its way to somewhere tender inside Vivian, somewhere she'd buried under years of building and climbing and never looking back. "No," she said quietly. "I don't." "That's sad." Penny said it simply, without judgment. Everyone should have a family, or at least someone to have dinner with. "I have dinner with people all the time," Vivian said. "Business dinners, networking events." Penny wrinkled her nose. "That's not the same. Daddy says real dinner is when you don't talk about work at all. You just talk about your day, and what made you happy, and what made you sad. Do you do that?" Vivian couldn't remember the last time she'd had that kind of dinner. Couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked her what made her happy or sad. Couldn't remember the last time she'd even asked herself. The sound of footsteps made her turn. Ray was walking back into the shop, wiping his hands on that same worn rag. He checked his watch, and something like a smile crossed his weathered face. Done. 14 minutes and 22 seconds. Vivian stood, smoothing her suit automatically. Already? What was the problem? Loose ground wire. Common issue on these models, especially on rough roads. Ray walked to the small sink in the corner and washed his hands with dish soap, his movements unhurried. "Car'll run fine now. Better than fine, actually. I tightened up a few other connections while I was in there." Vivian pulled out her wallet, but Ray held up a hand. "We had a deal," he said. 10 times my usual rate." "How much is your usual rate?" "For that repair? Normally about $50. Vivian stared at him. $50? For fixing a Mercedes? Ray shrugged. Labor was 12 minutes. Parts cost nothing. Just needed tightening. $50 is fair. He dried his hands and tossed the towel over his shoulder. "So I guess you owe me $500, but I'll take the 50. Don't need more than that." She didn't understand him. In her world, leverage was everything. If someone owed you, you collected. If you had the upper hand, you pressed it. This man had just won a bet that entitled him to $500, probably a significant sum for a shop like this, and he was turning it down. "Why?" she heard herself ask. "Why wouldn't you take the money?" Ray considered the question, his eyes drifting to Penny, who had gone back to her fractions. "Because I didn't fix your car for the money," he said. "I fixed it because it needed fixing. The bet was your idea, not mine." "But you could use the extra." Vivian stopped herself, suddenly aware of how insulting she was about to sound. "Extra money?" Ray finished for her. He didn't seem offended. "Sure, everyone could use extra money. But there's a difference between needing something and wanting something. I need enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. Beyond that," he shrugged again. "What's the point?" Before Vivian could respond, the bell above the door chimed. An elderly woman shuffled in, her face creased with worry, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. "Ray? I'm sorry to bother you, but Clarence's car is making that sound again. The one from last month?" Ray's entire demeanor shifted. The casual confidence gave way to genuine warmth. his voice gentle as he approached her. "Mrs. Miller, no bother at all. Let me take a look." He walked out with Mrs. Miller, leaving Vivian standing in the shop with Penny. Through the window, she watched him pop the hood of an ancient Buick, his head disappearing into the engine bay. Mrs. Miller hovered nearby, wringing her hands. After maybe 90 seconds, Ray straightened up, said something that made the old woman's shoulders sag with relief, and closed the hood. He didn't walk back to the shop immediately. Instead, he stood talking with Mrs. Miller, listening as she told him something that made her dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. He nodded, put a hand on her shoulder, said something that made her smile through her tears. When he finally came back inside, Mrs. Miller was already driving away. Without having paid, Vivian noticed. "Loose spark plug wire," Ray explained before she could ask. 30-second fix. "You didn't charge her?" "She's on a fixed income. Her husband passed last year. The car is the only way she gets to church and the grocery store." Ray walked to the coffee maker in the corner and poured himself a cup. "You want some? Just made it this morning." Vivian nodded automatically, still processing. She accepted the chipped mug he handed her. The coffee inside surprisingly good, strong and rich, nothing like the artisanal blends her assistant ordered for the office. "My dad used to say the shop wasn't really about cars," Ray said, settling into an old chair that creaked under his weight. "It was about people. Cars are just what bring them through the door." He took a long sip of his coffee. "Mrs. Miller comes in at least once a month. Sometimes there's a problem. Sometimes she just needs someone to talk to. Either way, she leaves feeling better than when she came in. That's worth more than whatever I could charge her." Vivian looked around the shop again, seeing it differently now. The photographs on the wall weren't just decorations. They were a history. Customers spanning decades, all standing proudly next to their vehicles, all wearing the same grateful smile. In one corner, a newspaper clipping had been framed. "Local mechanic saves family from car fire." The photo showed Ray, maybe 10 years younger, standing beside a burned-out sedan. The article headline continued, "Refuses reward, says anyone would have done the same." Another frame held a certificate, Community Hero Award, presented by the Ridgemont Town Council. And another, a child's drawing of the auto shop, stick figures labeled Daddy and Me standing in front of it, surrounded by hearts. "Penny drew that," Ray said, noticing her gaze. "First day she came to work with me after—" He paused, the first crack she'd seen in his composure. "After her mom passed. She was 3. Doesn't really remember her." "I'm sorry," Vivian said, and meant it. Ray nodded, accepting the condolence without dwelling on it. "We do okay, the two of us. Shop keeps the lights on. School's good here. Small, but the teachers know every kid by name. Neighbors look out for each other." He set down his coffee. "It's not much by some standards, but it's ours." The words landed heavily on Vivian's chest. "It's ours." She thought about the plans for Cole Plaza, the sleek renderings, the projected foot traffic, the revenue forecasts. Nowhere in those documents was there a mention of Mrs. Miller and her fixed income, of Penny and her math homework, of a community that looked out for each other. Those things didn't show up in spreadsheets. Her phone buzzed again. She looked at the screen. Her assistant. "Confirming council vote tomorrow. With your approval, Dawson property acquisition proceeds via eminent domain. All projections show minimal resistance." Minimal resistance. Ray Dawson was minimal resistance. His daughter. This shop. This community. Minimal resistance. Penny appeared at Vivian's elbow, holding out her math workbook. "I finished all the fractions. Look!" Her face was bright with accomplishment. "And I wrote you a thank you note." She pointed to the bottom of the page, where she'd written in careful, looping letters, "Thank you for helping me. You are nice. Your friend, Penny. Your friend." Vivian stared at the words, feeling something crack open inside her. When was the last time someone had called her a friend? When was the last time she'd done anything to deserve the title? Ray was watching her, his expression unreadable. "Penny likes you," he said. "She doesn't warm up to people easily. Got that from me, I guess. She's a special kid." Vivian's voice sounded strange to her own ears, softer, smaller. "She is." Ray stood, crossing to the window to look out at the quiet street. "You know, we've had some people come around here lately. Business types, suits, talking about buying up the property, making offers." He turned to face her. "I always say no. They always ask why, and I never know how to explain it in terms they'd understand." Vivian held her breath. "It's not about the money," Ray continued. "Never has been. My dad built this place with his own hands, taught me everything I know right here in this garage. When he got sick, I left a good job in the city to come back and take care of him. Spent his last 2 years fixing cars together, just like when I was a kid." He picked up a wrench from the workbench, turned it over in his hands. "This was his favorite. I use it every day. Not because it's the best tool, there are better ones, but because when I hold it, I feel like he's still here, still teaching me, still proud of me." He set the wrench down. "That's what those business types don't understand. They look at this place and see square footage, appraisal values, development potential. But this isn't real estate to me. It's my father's legacy. It's my daughter's childhood. It's every customer who's come through that door trusting me to help them, and every time I didn't let them down." He looked directly at Vivian, those creek water eyes steady and clear. "Some things aren't for sale, not because they don't have a price, but because selling them would cost me something I can't get back." Vivian felt the words settle into her bones. She thought about her own legacy. What would be left behind when she was gone? Buildings, bank accounts, a company that would continue making money long after she'd stopped caring about it. But no one would hold her tools with reverence. No one would draw pictures of her shop. No one would call her a friend. "Ms. Cole?" Penny was tugging at her sleeve, holding up the math workbook again. "You forgot to sign my thank you note. Daddy says it's important to remember who helps you." Vivian took the pencil Penny offered. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name beneath Penny's message. Vivian Cole. It looked strange there, sandwiched between fraction problems and a child's grateful words. Like it belonged to someone else. "Ray," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." Before she could continue, her phone rang. Not a buzz, an actual ring, the tone she'd assigned to urgent calls from her executive team. She answered automatically, years of conditioning overriding her intentions. "What?" "Ms. Cole, we need your confirmation on the Dawson acquisition. The council is ready to proceed, but they need your sign-off before the end of business today. The lawyers say, if we wait..." "I know what the lawyers say." Vivian's eyes found Ray's, then dropped to Penny, who was now coloring on the back of her homework. "I'll call you back." She hung up before her assistant could respond. The shop was quiet except for Penny's humming, some melody Vivian didn't recognize, and the distant rumble of a truck passing on the highway. Ray hadn't moved, his posture hadn't changed, but something in his expression had shifted, a knowingness that hadn't been there before. He walked to the small desk where Vivian had helped Penny with her homework, picked up a stack of papers that had been sitting face down, and placed them in front of her. Letters, legal notices, all bearing the logo of Cole Development. "I knew who you were the moment you stepped out of that car," Ray said quietly. "Not many Mercedes driving through Ridgemont, and not many people who look at my shop like it's something to be scraped off their shoe." He sat down across from her. "I didn't say anything because I wanted to see what kind of person you were when you weren't trying to take something." Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. "Ray, Daddy," Penny's voice cut through. Why does the lady look scared? Ray didn't take his eyes off Vivian. She's not scared, baby. She's just thinking. Sometimes thinking hard looks like being scared. He finally broke eye contact, turning to his daughter with a gentle smile. Why don't you go wash up? It's almost dinner time. Penny gathered her things obediently, pausing by Vivian's chair on her way out. Will you come back and help me with math again sometime? Vivian couldn't speak. She nodded, and Penny beamed before disappearing through a door at the back of the shop. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. Ray leaned back in his chair, studying Vivian with an expression she couldn't quite read. My daughter likes you, he said again. And Penny's got good instincts. Better than mine most days. I was going to destroy everything you have. The words came out raw, unpolished. Not the calculated language of a CEO, but the broken confession of someone who'd seen their reflection and didn't recognize it. Were you? Ray picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it down again. Or were you going to build something? From where I sit, those are two very different things with the exact same result. Vivian thought about his words. Building and destroying. She'd always seen herself as a builder, of empires, of opportunities, of wealth. But what had she actually created? Structures that replaced other structures. Businesses that consumed other businesses. A life that had no room for anything that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. I grew up in foster care, she heard herself say. The words surprised her. She never talked about this, not to anyone. Bounced around from house to house until I aged out. Nobody wanted to keep me. Nobody wanted to help me with my homework. Nobody, her voice cracked. Nobody called me their friend. Ray listened without interrupting. I told myself that if I got rich enough, powerful enough, successful enough, I'd never feel that way again. Like I was something to be disposed of. Vivian stared at her hands, manicured, soft, unused to real work. But somewhere along the way, I became the one doing the disposing, the one deciding who mattered and who didn't, the one looking at places like this and seeing problems to be solved instead of people to be respected. She looked up at Ray. I came here to take your home. And you fixed my car, gave me coffee, and let your daughter call me her friend. Ray was quiet for a long moment. The afternoon light through the window had shifted, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. You know what I see when I look at you, he finally said. I see someone who's been running so long, they forgot what they were running from. Someone who built walls so high, they can't remember what's outside them anymore. He leaned forward. I don't see a villain, Miss Cole. I see someone who got lost. That's a very generous reading. Maybe. Ray stood, walked to the coffee maker, poured fresh cups for both of them. Or maybe I've been doing this long enough to know that people are complicated, that the same person who wants to take something can also be the person who stays to help a kid with her math, that the same hands that sign demolition orders can also sign thank you notes. He handed her the coffee. She accepted it, wrapping her fingers around the warm ceramic. The question isn't who you've been, Ray said, settling back into his chair. The question is who you want to be. Because right now, in this moment, you get to choose. And whatever choice you make, you'll have to live with it. Vivian's phone sat on the desk between them, screen dark, silent for once. In a few hours, the council would vote. In a few days, this shop could be a pile of rubble. In a few months, Cole Plaza would rise in its place, glass and steel and profit, standing on the grave of everything this man had built. Or it wouldn't. She picked up her phone. Ray watched her, his expression neutral, not hopeful, not resigned, just present, waiting. Derek, Vivian said when her assistant answered. The Dawson property. Cancel everything. The silence on the other end was deafening. Miss Cole, I don't... The projections, the investors. I don't care about the projections. Call the council. Tell them Cole Development is withdrawing our interest. Then get me the number for the best community development consultant you can find. Community development? Ms. Cole, what exactly? We're going to do something different. Vivian looked at Ray, at the shop around her, at the photographs on the walls, and the worn tools on the pegboard, and the child's drawing that said, Daddy and me, surrounded by hearts. We're going to build something that doesn't require destroying anything first. Starting here. Starting now. She ended the call. The phone felt lighter in her hand than it ever had before. Ray still hadn't moved, but something had changed in his face. A softening around the eyes. A release of tension she hadn't noticed he was holding. You didn't have to do that, he said. Yes, I did. Vivian set the phone down. For reasons I'm only starting to understand. 6 months later, the sign in front of Dawson's Auto was freshly painted, the same design it had always been. Ray's father's handwriting, preserved and restored. But next door, where an abandoned warehouse had stood rotting for years, a new building was taking shape. Not a shopping center, not a corporate development, a community center. The Dawson Cole Community Center, the sign would eventually read, though Ray had fought against having any name at all. It should belong to everyone, he'd said. Not to me, not to you. To everyone who needs it. Vivian had convinced him that names mattered, that people would remember who had built it and why. In the end, they'd compromised. The grand opening was a small affair. No press releases, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies, no speeches from politicians. Just the people of Ridgemont gathering in a building that was theirs now. A place where children could do homework after school, where seniors could meet for coffee and conversation, where anyone who needed help could find it without being judged or charged. Penny cut the ribbon, a single red strand held between her small hands, her father standing behind her, with his hands on her shoulders. Vivian watched from the side, wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her Italian heels replaced by practical flats that she'd started wearing more often these days. When the ribbon fell, Penny ran to Vivian and grabbed her hand. Come see my favorite part. She dragged Vivian through the crowd, past the coffee station and the homework tables and the reading corner, to a small room at the back of the building. A sign on the door read, "The Penny Room for anyone who needs a friend." Inside, the walls were covered with children's drawings. In the center of it all, framed and hanging in a place of honor, was a math workbook page covered in fraction problems. At the bottom, in careful looping letters, "Thank you for helping me. You are nice. Your friend, Penny." Vivian stared at it, feeling the sting of tears she hadn't cried in decades. "That's where it all started," Penny said seriously. "Daddy says that's the most important part of the whole building, because that's when you became our friend." Ray appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He handed one to Vivian without a word. They stood in silence, looking at the framed homework page, at the drawings on the walls, at the evidence of something built instead of destroyed. "Thank you," Vivian finally said, "for giving me a chance to be different." Ray shook his head. "I didn't give you anything. You chose it. Every step of the way, you chose it." He took a sip of his coffee. "That's what makes it mean something." That night, after the celebration had wound down and the guests had gone home, Vivian's sedan, not the Mercedes she'd sold that months ago, pulled into the parking lot of Dawson's Auto. The shop was closed for the day, but the lights were on in the small apartment above it, and she could see Penny's silhouette in the window, probably getting ready for bed. She sat in her car for a moment, looking at the shop. It was still old, still weathered, still nothing like the gleaming developments that bore her name in cities across the country. But it was still standing, and because of it, she was still standing too. Ray emerged from the side door, wiping his hands on that same worn rag she remembered from that first day. He walked to her car, leaned against the driver's side door. "Figured you might swing by." "Car's making a strange sound," Vivian said. "Thought you might take a look." Ray smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "I can fix it in 15 minutes. "I know," Vivian smiled back. "This time, I believe you." She got out of the car, and together, they walked toward the garage. Above them, Penny's light went out, and the first stars of evening began to appear over Ridgemont. The town was quiet. The shop was waiting. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Vivian Cole felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Because sometimes, all it takes is 15 minutes. 15 minutes to fix a car. 15 minutes to fix a life. 15 minutes to remember that the measure of a person isn't what they build, but who they become while building it. And sometimes, the best thing you can build is a second chance.